So one of the most infamous and most repeated pieces of advice from Warren Buffett is this. Warren Buffett called the S&P 500 index the best thing for most people who want to invest. He said this multiple times. He's saying that the average person buying the S&P 500, which is just the general market, is the way to go. And this makes sense for a lot of reasons. They're passive, very low expenses, they're following an index, and the market, the general market, the S&P 500, VTI, VT, it's always used to benchmark other investments to see if a specific investment can beat the general market. And for whatever reason, most of the time, it doesn't. So that leaves the question, which market do you buy? Do you buy VOO, which is the S&P 500? Do you buy VTI, which is the total domestic market? Or do you buy VT, which is the total global market? That's what I'm going to talk about in this video, and hopefully by the end of it, we all have a slightly better understanding of these ETFs. All right, so the basics first. Here are the three ETFs. We can see we have VOO, the S&P 500, VTI, the total domestic stock market, and VT, total global stock market. And we can see that VOO has 507 holdings, VTI 3,759, and VT 9,017 holdings. So massive ETFs all around, but VT has more holdings and is more diversified, and VOO is more quote-unquote concentrated. I mean, it's still very well diversified with over 500 holdings, and then VTI is somewhere in the middle. They all have a super low expense ratio. After all, they're all passive, and the dividend yield is all roughly the same, 1.4, 1.3, 1.5%. So the next question is, who are these ETFs for? So Warren Buffett says that for most people of the general population, this is the way to go. And on top of that, I would add, if you want your brokerage account to look like this, very simple, one or two ETFs versus this, where you have to do a lot of research, handpick various companies, allocate to them, and then frequently do more research to keep up with it and make sure they're still being productive assets, then these ETFs are definitely the way to go. Now, you could be the best stock picker in the world, pick the best, most productive companies, but there's still a decent chance that you will not beat the market. We can see here I have two examples of two really high quality companies versus the S&P 500. So in this case, it's NextEra Energy, which is a green utility company, fantastic company. And we can see that this has outperformed the general market, the S&P 500, which is great over the past 5 years. And then over here, I have Merck & Co. This is one of the leading large pharmaceutical technology companies. And we can see that this has underperformed the market over the past 5 years. Now, is there a definitive reason why Merck has underperformed and NextEra Energy has overperformed? Not necessarily. The market can be irrational like that because at the end of the day, these prices are based off of what people are buying and selling the company for. So the lesson here is even if you pick some of the best companies in the world, you can still underperform just the market. So the next question is, how do you choose? So which market do you buy? And to do that, we have to look at the historical performance of these ETFs. So the S&P 500 VOO is in dark blue. VTI, the domestic market, is in yellow, and VT, the global market, is in light blue. And the key takeaway here is that VOO and VTI are essentially completely in line with each other. The S&P 500 is just the 500 largest companies in the US weighted by market cap, and VTI is that plus all of the smaller companies still weighted by market cap. So they're very similar. And then VT, the global market, we can see in light blue, ever since like 2018, it has been underperforming the domestic market. And it kind of makes sense because the US market is one of the richest and largest in the world, some of the greatest companies, and even some international companies like Alibaba and Spotify do trade on the US markets. So it could be one of those things where the rich just get richer, and that's why we see a deviation here. But of course, if you have some strong conviction that emerging markets, China, are going to begin to outperform, then you might want to look more into VT. Another thing we can do is look at the actual holdings. So there's a lot of them, but if we zoom in here a little bit, we can see that VOO and VTI, for their top few holdings here, we can see that they're almost identical. Perhaps a better tool, though, for looking at this is a website called ETF Comparison. I'll leave it linked down below. But this tool can be very useful just for identifying relationships between different ETFs. So we got VOO and VTI. And we can see here that 99.6% of VOO's holdings are within VTI. Also down here, there's another little bit. VOO overweight relative to VTI, and then the inverse over here. So this can be a useful little tool. Another way you could utilize this tool is to compare these ETFs versus more specialized ETFs. So we got SCHD, this is a dividend ETF, and then VUG, which is a growth ETF. And we can compare against these ETFs to see what characteristics are more represented in these ETFs. So do they have a lot of dividend companies? Do they have a lot of growth companies? You could also do like small cap, large cap ETFs and just see how it relates to these ETFs. So here I got VOO versus SCHD, and we can see that 55.6% of SCHD's holdings are within VOO. So I find this tool very useful for better understanding your investments. Now to wrap up here, the main advantage of these ETFs is that you actually don't need to do any of that research I was just talking about. That's the main advantage of these. You're buying the market. So no matter what happens, you're in the market, you're well diversified, and you can let your money grow over time with low expenses and peace of mind. We can see that VOO and VTI are so similar to one another. You can really choose either. VTI does have more smaller cap companies in it. And then VT, we can see, has underperformed the US market. And you have to remember that lots of international companies do trade on the US market, like Alibaba, Spotify, as mentioned before. But if you have some strong conviction that global markets are going to do better than domestic in the future, then of course you could invest in VT. But that's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed and got something out of it. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.